At 15, I learned the truth the way people learn about storms. First as a rumor in the air, then as a pressure change behind the ears, and finally as a crack that rearranges the whole horizon. The woman who raised me, May Harrow, did not sit me down with soft hands and an apology. She cornered me in the kitchen of our rented flat above a fish shop and used the confession like a blade. She had been drinking the kind of liquor that smells like burnt sugar and regret, and she was furious that I had come home with another scholarship letter and a stack of library books. "Stop pretending you're special," she hissed, palm flat against my report card as if grades were an insult. "You're not even mine." When I didn't gasp the way she wanted, she slapped me hard enough to make my ear ring for days, then spat the story in pieces. A coastal hospital, 2 babies born on the same night, a nurse in a rush, a bracelet swapped. Her real daughter, she said, had been carried away into a life of chandeliers. I had been delivered into a life of mildew and shouting. May's husband, Cal Harrow, hovered in the doorway with the helpless look of a man who has survived by pretending not to see. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend me. He only asked if I would still cook dinner. That was the moment I understood that truth, in some houses, is not a door out, it is another lock. For weeks afterward, I sat on the seawall at the edge of our town and watched trucks rumble past the docks, containers stamped with the name Vale, and I built a private myth. Somewhere behind the wall of that name were parents who would recognize me the instant they saw my face. Parents who would arrive with proof in arms and a car that smelled like new leather. People in town laughed when they saw me waiting. They called me a dreamer. They called me ungrateful. I kept waiting anyway, because a teenager can survive almost anything if she believes rescue is scheduled. The Vales did not come. Not that summer, not the next, not the year after. Later I learned that they had come close, that they had driven to my school once and watched from across the street. But the decision to claim me was always delayed by another decision to protect the girl they already had. The Vale name was spoken in my town the way people spoke about yachts or planets, as something huge, distant, and privately resented. Vale Maritime owned the warehouses at the river mouth, the shipping contracts, the customs brokers, the glossy charity plaques. Their daughter Celine, May, finally told me, after I asked in a voice that tried to sound casual, was sickly, which meant the kind of fragile that makes adults go quiet. The Vales had discovered the swap because Celine needed blood for surgery, and the tests had screamed mismatch. They had found me by process of elimination, by paperwork, by a private investigator who took photos of me walking home with my backpack and my second-hand shoes. "They know you exist," May said, delighting in my disappointment. "They just decided you're fine where you are." That sentence lived in my body like a splinter for 10 years. It shaped the way I learned. It shaped the way I planned. If rescue would not arrive, I would have to build my own exit and charge rent for anyone who wanted to step inside it. I studied in libraries, in the back room of a clinic, where the receptionist let me sit if I promised to keep my voice down. I worked nights wiping office desks that belonged to people who didn't know the brand of their own floor cleaner. I won scholarships like people win lifeboats. At 18, I left for the city with 2 suitcases and a quiet vow. The Vale family might own ships, but I would learn to move currents. Mathematics became my language of control. Quantitative finance became my weapon. I learned how small advantages, repeated, become inevitabilities. I learned how to read a balance sheet the way a diver reads the sea. I learned how to look calm while my heart raced. The Harrows town fell behind me, but it never became irrelevant. It became evidence. When people asked where I was from, I gave them a coordinate rather than a story. And that kept me safe. At 25, when my master's thesis was finished and my visa application for a doctoral program sat half completed on my laptop, the Vales finally arrived. They knocked on the door of my small, clean apartment in the city like people approaching a shrine. The man's suit was expensive but wrinkled at the elbows from nervous hands. The woman's hair was pinned too carefully, as if any loose strand would betray her. "Heiress," the woman said, and my name sounded heavy on her tongue, like she was lifting it for the first time. "I'm Nora Vale. This is my husband, Adrian." They carried a folder thick with documents, birth records, hospital logs, DNA results, a photograph of my newborn face beside another newborn face that was almost my twin. They cried as if tears were a kind of currency, and they tried to pay me with it. "We thought you were okay," Nora whispered. "We were so scared of hurting Celine. We kept waiting for the right time." I looked at them and felt the strangest calm. 10 years ago, I would have been a person desperate for their approval. Now I was a person with an offer letter from a hedge fund, and a plane ticket I could buy without asking anyone. I should have told them no. I should have closed the door and gone back to my own plans. Instead, I followed them. Not because I forgave them, and not because their house was large enough to impress me. I followed because a question that has lived inside you for 10 years will claw until you answer it, and I was tired of being haunted by maybes. The Vale estate sat behind a wall lined with ivy and cameras, the kind of place that made you lower your voice without being asked. Inside, polished stone floors reflected chandeliers, the way still water reflects the moon. I met the girl who had lived my life, Selene Vale. She stood behind Adrian's son, Noah, with a posture that suggested she was both protected and in charge. Selene was slim to the edge of disappearing, her skin pale as if sunlight were an enemy, her eyes alert in a way that said weakness was also strategy. Noah, younger than me by 2 years, watched me like a guard watches a door he doesn't want opened. Nora babbled introductions as if speed could prevent confrontation. Selene stepped forward first, hands clasped, voice soft. "I'm sorry," she said. "You must hate me." Her apology was performed with such perfect trembling that I almost admired it. Noah pulled her back as if she were glass. "You don't have to apologize," he snapped at me, as if I had demanded it. It was my first lesson inside the Vale house. I had blood, but she had history. They had prepared a room for me on the 4th floor like a costume for a role they assumed I still wanted. The walls were blush, the curtains floral, the bed draped with a canopy. A vanity crowded with scented lotions sat beside a wardrobe full of pastel dresses with tags still attached. "We remembered you liked pink," Nora said, hopeful. I remembered the school essay I wrote at 13 about a dream bedroom, because dreaming was cheaper than furniture. I remembered May ripping that essay and calling me foolish. I did not remember liking pink. I removed the curtains, folded the pink bedding, and stacked everything in the closet with the careful efficiency of someone clearing evidence. Nora's smile trembled. Noah appeared in the doorway and stared at the stripped bed as if I had insulted his mother's devotion. "Do you have any idea how long she worked on this?" he demanded. I looked at him and asked evenly. "Do you have any idea how long I waited?" Silence filled the room like smoke. Nora began to cry in a small, polite way, and Noah's anger shifted into confusion, as if he had expected me to be grateful and was now forced to recalibrate. That night I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of a house built to prevent discomfort. I thought about May's kitchen, the smell of fish in the air, the slap that made my ear ring. I thought about the distance between that kitchen and this room, and how the distance was measured not in kilometers but in decisions. By morning, I had decided to treat the Vale house as an opportunity, not a sanctuary. If they wanted to claim me now, it would be on terms that acknowledged what they had cost me. Selene visited after breakfast, carrying a glass of warm milk and a smile that had recovered its confidence. She walked around my room like a landlord inspecting a renovation. "You removed the curtains," she observed, bold. When I didn't respond, she leaned closer, voice turning conspiratorial. She told me she had known about me for years. "The first time Nora and Adrian planned to come for me," Selene said, she had stood under a cold shower until she collapsed with fever. The second time, she had dragged a blade lightly across her wrist. Not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to produce panic. "They held me and promised I was their only girl," Selene said, showing a thin scar with the pride of a trophy. "After that, they stopped trying." She smiled. "You should be grateful I let you come at all. Most people don't get a second chance at being the right daughter." She ended with a nickname, one May used when she wanted to humiliate me in front of neighbors, a rural joke that meant spare girl. Selene said it as if she were putting a collar on me. The room went very still. My hands did not shake. I stepped forward, took her wrist, and guided her toward the window. The garden below was a drop of white blossoms in stone. Selene's breath hitched as her balance shifted. I let her feel the air under her feet for a long, terrifying second, then pulled her back and released her gently onto the floor. I leaned down and said, quietly, "If you ever speak that name again, I won't need to threaten you. Your own story will do it for me." She stared up, shocked that my calm could contain violence. When she crawled out of my room, she left her milk untouched. I drank it anyway. It tasted like surrender and warmth, and I refused to waste either. At lunch, Adrian cleared his throat like a man beginning a negotiation. He spoke about adjustment, about family harmony, about letting Selene settle. Nora overfed me the way guilty people do, stacking food on my plate as if calories could fill a decade. Then Nora delivered the real agenda wrapped in softness. "There's something we should discuss," she said, fingers twisting her napkin. "Years ago, before we knew, we made an understanding with the Rook family. Their youngest son, Jasper, was intended for you." Adrian watched my face the way investors watch a market ready to move if they saw panic. I asked, "So you brought me back for a wedding?" Nora protested, but Adrian didn't deny it. "It's not only that," he said, which meant it was mostly that. The Rooks owned logistics tech, ports, and insurance partners Vale Maritime needed for an IPO. Celine did not want Jasper, and the Rooks did not want embarrassment. The problem could be solved by placing me in the correct seat, like returning a misdelivered package. I rested my fork, wiped my mouth, and said I would consider it if they gave me 5% equity in Vale Maritime. Nora dropped her napkin as if I had asked for a kidney. "Daughters don't," she began, then stopped when Adrian's gaze sharpened. In my mind, the word daughter had never been free. It had always been priced. I opened my laptop and showed Adrian my record. Scholarships, published work, internship evaluations, investment returns, recommendations from professors who trusted me with real money. I wasn't begging for access. I was presenting a valuation. "You don't need to love me," I said, "but you do need to respect leverage. If I marry into the Rooks, I'm not doing it for romance. I'm doing it to secure a stake that matches what you're asking me to trade." Adrian argued about tradition. I argued about outcomes. In the end, he offered a compromise. A small stake now, larger later, contingent on Jasper actually agreeing. "Convince him," Adrian said, as if love were a contract I could enforce. I smiled once, thinly, because he had no idea how easy it was to convince a man who believed he was untouchable. Touch him hard enough, and he listens. Jasper Rook arrived like he had never been told no. He didn't show up in a chauffeured sedan. He drove a convertible the color of a warning label. Music loud enough to make pedestrians glance over. He leaned on the car door in sunglasses, smile lazy, making charm look effortless because he had been practicing since childhood. "Heiress Vale," he said. "Not Harrow, not the girl from the fish shop. You're later than expected." He took me, deliberately, to a private room in a nightclub where the air was thick with smoke and bravado. His friends rose when he entered, grinning like wolves. "This is the Vale girl," Jasper announced. "The late delivery." Someone laughed. Someone offered me a seat, as if I were a purchased accessory. Jasper poured himself whiskey, then raised the glass toward me without offering one. "So," he drawled, "tell me how it feels to move from gutter to chandelier." The room waited for me to flinch. Instead, I stepped forward, picked up the heavy crystal decanter, and brought it down against the edge of the table with a sharp crack that made everyone freeze. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I simply used the broken base as a shard of truth. "It feels like nothing," I said, "because I'm not here to admire your ceiling. I'm here to decide whether you're useful." Jasper's smile faltered. He leaned back, pretending amusement, but his eyes hardened. "You're bold," he said, "or stupid." I set the shard down, then took the decanter stopper and flicked it into his glass, sending whiskey splashing across his shirt. "That's a cleaning fee," I said. "Consider it my first invoice." In the doorway, Celine appeared, breathless, clutching her phone as if she had come to record my humiliation. "How could you?" she cried, rushing toward Jasper and then glaring at me. "If the Rooks retaliate, do you know what you'll do to my family?" "My family," she said, as if I were the intruder. Jasper, now angry and embarrassed, rose too fast and caught his forehead on the sharp corner of a hanging shelf, splitting skin. Blood appeared like red punctuation. Celine lunged to steady him, shaking him in panic until Jasper snapped, "Stop!" with more desperation than authority. I grabbed a napkin, pressed it to his wound, and said, "You have two choices. You walk out and tell your parents you refuse this engagement, or you come with me to the hospital and start acting like a man who understands consequence." Jasper stared at me, stunned by the way I had seized control of a room built to flatter him. He was a rich boy used to people translating his mistakes into jokes. For the first time, someone had translated his mistake into pain. That night, in the hospital's harsh fluorescent light, he sat on an exam table while a nurse cleaned his wound and asked, with genuine confusion, "Who are you?" I answered for him. "He's someone who wants to matter," I said. Jasper's eyes sharpened. He dismissed Celine with a curt gesture that surprised even him. Later, in the parking lot, He asked why I hadn't used the incident to ruin him. I adjusted my coat and said, "Because I don't want your ruin. I want your appetite. If you agree to this engagement, I'll help you build leverage inside your family. If you don't, I'll still leave with equity, because I can." A message arrived on my phone minutes later. A new contact request. "Hello, future fiancé," it read. I accepted because transactions are easier than affection, and I had learned to trust the former. The combined welcome and engagement gala arrived with chandeliers, violin music, and too many cameras. Adrian led me through clusters of guests, introducing me with rehearsed warmth. Our daughter, Heiress. The phrase sounded more convincing under spotlight than in private, but I stored the difference, rather than complaining. Jasper wore tailored black and played attentive fiancé with enough skill to fool people who wanted to believe in happy narratives. Selene approached with champagne and the delicate cough she used to redirect sympathy toward herself. Noah hovered behind her, jaw tight. Selene lifted her glass. "To family," she said. "To happy endings." Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to contradict her script. I smiled and clinked her glass anyway, because I understood that battles are won by choosing the right terrain. The right terrain arrived soon. The music faltered. A large screen behind the stage flickered, then filled with shaky footage. A cramped kitchen, a woman screaming, a teenager on the floor covering her head with her arms. The teenager's face turned toward the camera in one clear frame, and it was my face at 16. Mejero's voice blasted through the speakers, filthy, furious, unfiltered. She called me ungrateful. She called me worthless. She bragged about the Vale family's abandonment. Guests gasped, then whispered, then stared at me with the greedy curiosity of people watching an accident. In the first seconds, the humiliation tried to land. Then I felt something else. Clarity. Someone had chosen to deploy my past as a weapon in a room full of investors. That meant my past now had market value. Celine's voice floated sweetly through the stunned silence. "I'm worried," she said, performing compassion while aiming a blade. "Jasper, did she tell you? She can't hear well on one side. Poor thing. It's hard to trust someone who hides that." The cruelty was subtle enough to masquerade as concern. Nora made a sound like an animal struck. Adrian's face went pale. Not with pity, but with fury at the loss of control. I turned toward the cameras, lifted my chin, and spoke into the quiet. "Yes," I said. "I lost hearing in one ear after a head injury when I was 16. The injury happened in a house where adults thought a child was expendable. If you're shocked, be shocked at them, not at me." I let my gaze sweep the room. I'm not ashamed of surviving. The room held its breath. Then, like a wave turning, people began to nod. Sympathy is a strange currency. It spends best when paired with strength. Adrian realized it immediately. His posture shifted from panic into strategy. Nora, sobbing, rushed toward me as if to protect me from the consequences of her own delay. Noah stood rigid, eyes darting, and I saw the truth in his pupils before anyone admitted it. He knew exactly how the video had entered the system. After the gala collapsed into chaos, technicians traced the upload to a staff login used by Noah's assistant. Noah denied it, then faltered. Selene cried, then raged, then claimed she had only wanted truth. Adrian slapped Noah, not as a father but as a chairman punishing a liability. "You embarrassed the company," he snarled. Noah's resentment burned hotter, but fear kept him quiet. Selena stared at me as if I had stolen her son. I sat across from them and said, calmly, "This changes nothing for me. It changes your narrative." I watched Adrian's jaw tighten as he understood that my narrative could be turned into a launch pad. In the hallway afterward, Nora begged me not to leave. I didn't promise. I only asked, "Where were you when I needed you?" She had no answer that didn't sound like cowardice. The next morning, my name trended across multiple platforms. Commentators called me the unluckiest heiress, and then, inevitably, the most inspiring. Celine's social media history was mined and displayed. Designer bags, vacations, private jets. The public loved a contrast. They hated a usurper. Adrian, ever pragmatic, allowed the narrative to run because it increased attention ahead of the listing he now saw as necessary. Meanwhile, I worked. Vale Maritime had survived on conservative habits and old relationships. It had also grown complacent, insulated by the myth that ships move themselves. I walked into headquarters on my first day and felt a room full of senior managers measuring me as a novelty. They expected a decorative daughter, a new face to show at dinners. I gave them a spreadsheet instead. I audited contracts. I renegotiated insurance. I built a risk model that made our executives uncomfortable because it revealed how much they had been relying on luck. I proposed a partnership with the Rook's logistics platform on terms that favored Vale, and Jasper playing his part ensured his family accepted because he was hungry to prove he could deliver. Every time I took a meeting, I watched for the micro-expressions of men who had built careers on women smiling politely. They hated that I smiled only when I meant it. Nora tried to act like a mother by bringing lunchboxes to my office, setting them on my desk with hopeful eyes. I thanked her and ate, because food is food, but I didn't pretend her gestures repaired the past. Noah stayed distant, ashamed and angry, drifting between loyalty to Celine and the realization that his sabotage had only hardened me. Selena oscillated between frailty and superiority, depending on which posture produced more power. When she visited headquarters, she spoke to staff as if they were hers. When she saw me in meetings, she watched my hands, looking for tremors she could exploit. She didn't find any. As the IPO preparations accelerated, board members began to push back. They called my strategies aggressive. They called my proposals risky. They meant I had disrupted the comfort they had confused with stability. Adrian argued with me in his office late at night, his voice sharp with the fear of a man who built an empire and now felt it being reshaped by someone he could not fully control. "You're moving too fast," he warned. I replied, "I've been waiting 10 years. I'm not interested in slow." In one particularly ugly meeting, a director suggested that, as a woman, I should focus on public relations while men handled operations. I asked him to define operations. He hesitated, and I filled the silence with a list of the contracts I had renegotiated, the costs I had cut, the revenue I had increased. Then I looked at Adrian and said, "If you keep directors who confuse sexism with expertise, your valuation will suffer." Adrian stared at me for a long time. In that stare, I saw recognition, reluctant and grudging. He had sought a daughter who would be grateful and pliable. He had found an adult who would either elevate his company or expose it. He began, slowly, to choose elevation. He granted me a larger stake. He gave me a seat at the table. He started referring to me, in front of others, as his successor. Nora cried the first time she heard it. Celine smiled at the same moment, a smile like a fracture. She had lost control of the script, and she had no idea how to write a new one. Midwinter brought an invitation back to the estate for a holiday dinner, the kind of tradition built to pretend families are simple. Snow fell in thin sheets, making the gardens look softer than they deserved. I arrived to find Nora, Celine, and Adrian folding dumplings at the table like a family in a commercial. Noah was home from a trip and offered a stiff greeting. Then, with unexpected awkwardness, he produced a small box. "Your birthday was last week," he said. I didn't know what to get. I didn't celebrate birthdays. Mine marked the day my existence became a mistake in 2 households. Still, I accepted his box because I recognized an olive branch when I saw one, even if it came with thorns. Nora's gift was a designer handbag, expensive, fashionable, heavy with apology. Selene's gift came last. She handed me a sleek case and smiled brightly. "Everyone gives you pretty things," she said. I wanted to be practical. Inside was an assistive audio device, customized, the sort of thing wealthy people buy to feel philanthropic about technology. The engraving along the edge made my stomach go still. The rural nickname May had used, carved neatly as if cruelty could be made elegant. Celine leaned closer, eyes shining. "It matches you," she murmured. "Try it." The room waited for my reaction. Nora's face tightened with confusion. Noah leaned in, then froze when he saw the engraving. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I placed the device back in its case, set the case on the table, and said, "You engraved humiliation and called it care." Celine's smile flickered, then collapsed. "You're overreacting," she snapped, and then the dam broke. She screamed that she had fought for her place, that she had bled to keep the Valais from reaching for me, that my competence made her feel invisible, that my existence made her childhood look like theft. Nora tried to hush her, hands shaking. Adrian's expression hardened in a way I recognized now, the face of a man calculating damage. Celine's voice rose into a howl. "Why didn't May finish the job?" she spat, and the room went silent as if the snow outside had swallowed all sound. Nora made a choking noise. Noah stepped toward Celine as if to defend her, then stopped, as if he finally understood what he had been defending. Adrian slapped Celine. The sound was sharp and final. Celine stared at him with disbelief. Nora cried and tried to hold her. Adrian's voice, when it came, was low and cold. "You don't get to speak about my daughter like that," he said. The word daughter landed in the air, and I felt, absurdly, nothing. Not warmth, not triumph, only the distant irony that he had found the protective instinct too late. I stood, collected my coat, and left the estate while Nora begged me to stay. Outside the gate, Jasper's car waited. He had come without being invited, as if he had learned my storms tended to happen on holidays. He didn't ask questions. He simply opened the passenger door and said, "My mother made too many dumplings. Come help me destroy them." I got in, not because I needed rescue, but because sometimes a quiet ride is a kind of medicine. The IPO process reached its sharpest point soon after. Auditors arrived. Lawyers multiplied. Every decision became public-facing. Adrian clung to tradition in some areas, but I forced modernization in the ones that mattered. I built a family trust proposal and slid it across his desk one night after a brutal board meeting. "Noah isn't built for this," I said. "That's not an insult. It's a fact. Let him pursue whatever he wants. Let him be safe. I'll make sure he's provided for, but the company needs a leader who can handle pressure without turning it into sabotage." Adrian studied the documents with a mixture of outrage and reluctant admiration. It was the first time he looked at me not as a mistake corrected, but as a force. He didn't agree immediately. He argued. He raged. He accused me of coldness. I replied, "You raised a child in your house for 25 years and didn't notice she was training herself to manipulate you. Don't lecture me on cold." In the end, he gave ground because markets punish nostalgia. The listing day was bright and loud. The exchange floor flashed our ticker. Cameras crowded. Employees cheered in the company auditorium, some because they believed in me, others because equity makes loyalty easy. Adrian stood beside me for photographs, proud and exhausted. Afterward, in a private office, he finally handed me the transfer documents matching the stake I had demanded. "You earned it," he admitted. The admission mattered only because it was rare. The market calmed. Reporters moved on. That was when I opened my own folder, the one I had been quietly building for months. Jasper had charm, ambition, and weakness. Weakness is a leak, and leaks can be measured. I had evidence of his late-night escapades, his misuse of company vehicles, his promises to minor executives, and the way he tried to leverage our engagement for influence beyond what his family intended. I did not collect the evidence to punish him for being human. I collected it because he had signed up for an alliance, and alliances require discipline. When I confronted him, I did it in a conference room with no cameras. He tried to laugh it off. He tried to call it a mistake. He tried to claim he had been lonely. I listened, then said, "Loneliness is not a license." He reached for my hand. I moved my hand away. The rejection hit him harder than anger would have. "Did you ever care about me?" he asked, voice raw. I answered honestly. I cared about our shared interest. I cared about what we were building. I don't build my life around affection, Jasper. I build it around choices. He stared as if I had spoken a language he wasn't taught. I met with his older brother, Damien Rook, the next day. I slid my folder across the table. Damien's eyes narrowed as he skimmed the pages. "What do you want?" he asked. "Your family's withdrawal from the third phase of our joint port redevelopment," I said. "In exchange, you get the names of everyone Jasper recruited, and you get to decide whether to save him or bury him." Damien leaned back, assessing me, then smiled once, faintly. "You're ruthless," he said. "I'm accurate," I replied. The engagement ended. Investors shrugged because quarterly results remained strong. Jasper was stripped of authority and confined to a ceremonial role. When he came to my office that night, eyes wild, asking why I had done it, I said, "Because I refused to become someone's cautionary tale. Because I didn't survive May Harrow to be undone by a man who can't manage himself." He left without another word. The silence afterward felt clean. Celine's story ended in a way that made Nora's grief loud. Her mind had been fraying for months, mood swings, paranoia, cruel bursts of honesty, sudden sweetness that felt like a trap. After the holiday incident, Adrian insisted she see specialists, but Celine treated help like humiliation. She hid pills, skipped appointments, charmed doctors, lied to Nora. Then, one afternoon, she was found unresponsive in her room, surrounded by bottles and notes that alternated between blame and pleading. Nora's wail at the hospital was the kind of sound that rearranges a room. Adrian stood rigid, face empty. Noah crumpled as if someone had cut his strings. I watched from the corner and felt, again, that strange calm. I did not celebrate Celine's death. I did not feel victory. I felt only the bitter certainty that her war had consumed her. In the weeks after, Nora drifted through the estate like a sleepwalker. Adrian arranged a funeral so tasteful it looked like branding. Noah left the country for graduate school, claiming he needed distance. Maybe he did. Nora and Adrian eventually moved abroad for what they called a retreat, and what I recognized as exile from memories. With the family dispersed, I turned back to the origin. May Harrow had always believed she could beat the truth out of me. Years later, she tried to sell interviews about my real personality, insisting she had raised me and deserved compensation. I filed charges for sustained abuse, supported by school records, neighbor testimony, medical reports, and ironically, the video that had once been used to shame me. The legal process moved slower than vengeance fantasies, but faster than May expected. In court, she cried, then shouted, then blamed poverty, then claimed love. The judge watched without sympathy. Cal Harrow tried to say he hadn't known how to stop her. The prosecutor asked why he hadn't called the police. Cal had no answer. When the verdict came, May's face went slack, as if she had always assumed consequences were for other people. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt my damaged ear catch a gust of wind. The world was still lopsided in sound, but the imbalance no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a reminder. At 30, I owned enough voting power to steer Vale Maritime and enough distance to refuse family theatrics. I built a trust for Noah despite his betrayals because I understood that children raised inside a substitution system often become its defenders before they become its critics. I restructured the estate into a foundation that funded rural clinics, the kind of clinics where hospital bracelets are supposed to be checked twice. Nora sent me occasional messages from abroad, apologies, photos of quiet places, the stubborn hope that I might one day call her Mom. I replied politely. Adrian sent quarterly reports and questions about strategy. That, at least, was a language we shared. Years later, at a charity auction in a hotel ballroom, I saw Jasper again. He stood near the back, older, charm muted into something closer to humility. His fiancée laughed too loudly at a joke he didn't finish. Jasper's gaze found mine across the crowd and held for a heartbeat with the strange intimacy of people who have seen each other in war rooms. He looked as if he wanted to speak, to ask for a different ending, to offer one of those soft apologies that arrive when it is safe. I lifted my glass in a small, impersonal salute and turned away. My life was not a story about love saving me, or family healing me, or fate correcting itself. My life was a story about a girl who waited 10 years for rescue, then learned to become the person who never has to wait again. The decisions that shaped me were not always kind. They were, however, mine. A lab report had handed me a surname. Discipline and time had carved out the future. That was the only kind of inheritance that never lied to me. The company listed on a bright morning that felt staged for television. Our ticker flashed across screens, and the bell sounded like a door being shut on the past. Adrian stood beside me for photographs, jaw clenched with pride and exhaustion, while Nora hovered just outside the frame as if she still wasn't sure she deserved to be seen. Reporters asked about my journey, and I answered with numbers: the percentage of late shipments we had cut, the contracts we had won, the safety audits we had passed, and the cash reserves we had built. When the press moved on to easier stories, Adrian pulled me into a quiet office and placed the amended share transfer agreement on the table. This time it wasn't a symbolic sliver. This time it was real power. Signed with a hand that trembled slightly as he admitted, without ceremony, that the company now needed me more than it needed his pride. Once the market calmed and Vale's public image stopped wobbling, I opened the folder I had been building on Jasper. It wasn't jealousy that made me collect evidence. It was pattern recognition. A man who cheats will also lie in meetings, shift blame in crises, and betray partners when pressure rises. Jasper had slipped into old habits. Late nights that smelled of alcohol and applause, business dinners that stretched into dawn, and a careful trail of gifts routed through assistants to make betrayal look like logistics. I didn't confront him in private the way movies teach people to do. I met Damien Rook, Jasper's older brother and the true center of gravity in their family, and I laid the folder between us like a clean instrument. Your brother built a faction, I said. Here are the names, the payments, and the messages. Damien read in silence. What do you want? he asked at last. Withdraw from the third phase of the harbor redevelopment, I replied. And I'll deliver you the map to dismantle him before he breaks your company. The deal was ugly, efficient, and final. The engagement ended with a press release and a photograph that looked calm enough to convince casual observers it had been mutual. Jasper tried to see me anyway. He showed up outside my office once, then outside my apartment, then at a charity event where he acted like the world's most polite ghost. When he finally caught me alone in a corridor, his voice shook. Did you ever feel anything for me? He asked, as if my answer could rewrite his choices. I didn't raise my voice. I felt the risk you represented, I said. I felt the leverage you offered. I felt tired when I had to keep steering you back toward your own spine. His face tightened. So I was a tool. You were a choice, I corrected. And that was the most mercy I gave. He reached for my wrist. I stepped back. No slap, no drama. Just the quiet refusal that leaves no room for negotiation. After Celine's death, the estate became quieter in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Nora moved through rooms like a shadow, touching furniture as if it could anchor her. Adrian retreated into work because grief is easier to handle when disguised as schedules. Noah stopped talking about protecting anyone and started asking smaller questions. What therapy was, what accountability meant, why love could become possession. He didn't apologize to me with speeches. He did it by finally stepping out from behind Celine's story. He resigned from the internal Vale succession track, signed his voting rights into the trust structure I had built, and asked only that Nora be cared for even if she never learned to stop blaming herself. When he handed me the documents, his eyes were red. I thought I was being loyal, he said. I was just being afraid. I nodded, because fear explained a lot, and because understanding is not the same as pardoning. I returned, then, to the origin. May Harrow had heard my name in the news and decided she deserved profit for having failed to destroy me. She contacted tabloids, offered interviews, called herself the real mother, with the shameless confidence of people who mistake proximity for love. She mailed the Vale estate a letter demanding money, claiming I owed her for food, shelter, and school fees she had never paid. When I refused, she threatened to release proof that I was ungrateful. I filed charges for sustained abuse, supported by school records, clinic notes, neighbors who had once looked away and now could no longer pretend, and the old video that Noah had tried to weaponize. In court, May's tears arrived on cue. Her excuses arrived faster. The judge listened, then asked the only question that mattered. Why did you keep hitting a child after the child stopped fighting back? May had no answer that could be called human. The sentence was not cinematic. It was ordinary, documented, and enforceable. And that was the point. At 30, I held enough voting power to steer Vale Maritime, and enough distance to refuse family drama. I created a trust for Noah anyway, because I understood that children raised inside substitutions often become their defenders before they become their critics. And because spite is a waste of capital, I restructured the estate into a foundation that funded medical audits and rural clinics, the kind of clinics where tags are checked twice and records are kept forever. Nora sent me occasional messages from abroad, photos of a quiet beach, a short line about therapy, a longer line about regret, but she stopped asking for forgiveness. Adrian sent quarterly notes that read like board reports and ended, sometimes, with a single sentence that sounded almost like a father trying to learn a new language. Years later, at an auction in a hotel ballroom, I saw Jasper again. He looked older. His charm dimmed into something like caution. Our eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment his expression carried the same question he had asked in the corridor. I didn't answer it. I simply raised my glass, turned back to my conversation, and let the past remain what it was. A set of decisions. Most of them lonely. All of them mine. Blood had given me a surname. Effort had given me a future. That was the only inheritance I trusted. On the first anniversary of the listing, I visited the small coastal hospital where the swap had happened. The administrator brought out dusty ledgers and apologized as if apology